Hi everyone, welcome back to the Unsolved Society. My name is Maddie. Today's case is one that has baffled law enforcement, family, and friends, etc. for over 30 years. We are talking about the case of the Springfield Three. The Springfield Three are three women, Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, that all went missing from the Levitt residence on the night of Suzie and Stacy's high school graduation. This case has drawn so many questions over the years because it's so hard to understand how three grown women went missing and left little to no evidence behind. Before we jump into all the details of this case, if you are a fan of true crime or unsolved mysteries, please consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel for weekly video uploads. It's very helpful to this smaller growing channel like this one. I'd also like to dedicate this video to the loved ones of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall. We hope that the continued coverage of their case helps to bring those long-awaited answers that their family and friends are still so desperate for more than 30 years later. In 1992, Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall were high school seniors getting ready to graduate from Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri. Suzie's mother, Sherrill, was 47 years old and a cosmetologist at a local salon. Suzie and her mother Sherrill were often described as very, very close according to their loved ones. Sherrill had recently gone through a divorce and purchased the house on East Delmar Way in Springfield, Missouri, just 2 months prior to their disappearance. Stacy McCall and Suzie Streeter had been friends since they were young. Over the years, they had naturally drifted apart and found separate friend circles, but they still did remain close friends. Stacy was known for being very lighthearted, fun, and even had the nickname of Spacey Stacy. She was known to hang out with other class clowns that had a similar sense of humor as her. But on the other hand, Suzie Streeter was known to hang out with more of the popular crowd, and he even dated a notable local bad boy. On the evening of June 6, 1992, Sherrill Levitt left Suzie and Stacy's graduation ceremony and was planning just to spend a quiet evening at home, doing various DIY projects like painting a dresser and hanging wallpaper. Reports do state that Sherrill last spoke with a close friend of hers on the phone that evening at around 11:15 p.m. On the other hand, Suzie and Stacy had a fun night planned full of parties and celebration for their recent high school graduation. They planned to go to multiple parties that night and then drive to Branson, Missouri, which was about 45 minutes away, where they would visit the Whitewater Amusement Park early the next morning. Around 10:30 p.m., Stacy McCall called her mother Janice to let her know that there was actually a change of plans, and instead of driving all the way out to Branson that night, the two girls would actually be staying with a friend of theirs named Janelle Kirby instead. The girls would attend multiple parties that evening, like I said, the last one being at their friend Michelle Ender's house in Battlefield, Missouri. The party received a noise complaint, and law enforcement showed up at around 1:45 a.m. to break up the party. Like I said before, the girls had planned to stay at their friend Janelle Kirby's house that night, but they realized that there were so many out-of-town family members staying at her house because of the recent graduation that there was just not really a lot of room for them to sleep, and they would probably be more comfortable back at Suzie's house in Springfield. There are other reports that earlier in the evening at one of the first parties they visited, they spoke with a friend named Brian Joy, and he had actually offered to let the girls stay at his house that night. But by the time that they arrived after 2 a.m., Brian was already tired and in bed, and by his accounts, he was a little bit grumpy with the girls and actually told them that they could no longer stay there. Either way, the last official sighting of the girls would be when they left the graduation party at around 2 a.m. in the early hours of June 7th, 1992. Now, it's assumed that the girls returned back to Suzie's house on East Delmar somewhere around 2:30 a.m., 2:15, 2:30 a.m. Bright and early the next morning, friends of Suzie and Stacy began to call the home around 7:30 a.m. to start making arrangements to travel to that water park in Branson like we talked about. But they would get no answer. After continuing to call and still getting no answer, at around 12:30 p.m., Janelle Kirby, that same friend that had offered to let them stay at her house the previous night, and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, decided to drive to Suzie's house. When they approached the house, the first thing that they noticed was that all three women's cars were present. Although Suzie's car was not parked in its normal location under the carport. Many assume, looking back on this, is that maybe there was a possibility that when the girls arrived home, there was already a car in that roundabout driveway, but obviously that's just speculation. When the two approached the front door, they noticed the glass globe around the front porch light had been broken and shattered, so there was glass all over the front step. So Mike took initiative to clean up the glass, and from reports, he didn't put it in any type of trash can. He actually put it over the fence where there was like a dental office on the other side. Either way, disturbing any evidence that might have been there. They would attempt to twist the doorknob, announce themselves, and enter the home and see really nothing out of place. All three women's purses were present, along with the family dog Cinnamon, who was reported as acting somewhat anxious. Suzie's TV was still on, and the two slats in her window blinds had been stuck in a separated position, like someone had been peeking out. While they were in the home, the phone rings, and Janelle answers when a man is on the other end saying sexually explicit, obscene things. He reportedly calls back again, and Janelle hangs up the phone. There has been speculation that there was also an obscene voicemail left on the answering machine, but that was accidentally deleted. Some reports say it was Janelle that deleted this voicemail. Other reports say it's actually Stacy's mom from later on in the day, but that's obviously really, really hard to tell. Either way, we don't know exactly what was said in either the phone call or the voicemail specifically. I think it's important to note that Janelle and Mike didn't suspect anything was wrong at this point in time, especially since the girls' purses were still in the house. Purses that contained $900 in Sherrill's wallet and important things like Stacy's medications. Instead, they assumed that the three women had to be somewhere nearby, so they decided to leave, visit a friend's house, then a nearby water slide, and return around 7:30 p.m. that night. They would find everything in the exact same place, and the three women still nowhere to be found. As the sun started to set, Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, grew more and more anxious after still no word from her daughter. She had called Janelle Kirby's house earlier that day looking for her, and spoke to Janelle's sister that told her that the girls actually ended up staying at Suzie's house. She had called Suzie's house multiple times during the day, left multiple voicemails, but still no word. Her anxiety turned to fear when the mother of another one of Stacy's friends came over and had asked, "Are you aware that Stacy's purse and her car and Suzie's car is still at Sherrill's house, but the girls aren't?" So around 9 p.m., Janice jumped in the car with one of Stacy's older sisters and headed for the house on East Del Mar. Her mom planned to gather Stacy's belongings and have Stacy's older sister drive Stacy's car back to their house, almost as like a punishment or a prank for not telling her mother where she was. But when she arrived, she entered the house and switched on a light, noticing how quiet it was. As time went on, more and more worried friends and family began to file into that small house on East Del Mar. They began going through Sherrill's phone book and calling around to see if anyone had any idea where the women could be. They got nothing more than dead ends. At this point, Janice decided to call the police department. Still thinking that this wasn't an emergency though, she decided to call the police department directly rather than calling 911. Janice has even said in recent interviews that 911 was actually kind of a new concept at this point. It had only been installed a few months prior. After speaking to police on the phone, an officer would arrive within a few minutes. When they did arrive, an estimated 15 to 20 people had already been through the home, disturbing any evidence that was left behind. As police began to walk through the home, they noticed things like the beds looked like they had been slept in, and there was used makeup remover cloths in the hamper. Stacy's clothing was still folded in Suzie's room, with her jewelry neatly tucked into the pockets of her flowered shorts. Stacy's mom, Janice, says that the only missing item would be the yellow top she was wearing that evening and a pair of her underwear. Police would file a missing persons report for all three women, and an exhaustive search would begin. Over the following days and weeks, thousands of tips would roll into police, from a transient man seen near the home in the days prior to a waitress claiming all three women came into a nearby Georgia's steakhouse between 1 and 3 a.m. that night. However, none of that has been confirmed. Police also released a photo of a green van that was spotted near the residence. Certain reports claim a witness gave a tip to police that they actually saw Suzie, or a woman matching Suzie's description, driving that van on the morning of June 7th. However, that has never been confirmed by police either. The next notable tip, or partial tip I should really say, would come on December 31st, 1992, when a man called into an America's Most Wanted tip line but got disconnected when the operator attempted to transfer the call to police. According to reports, the man had prime knowledge of the abductions, quote unquote. There was even a public plea for the man to call back, but he never did. Over the following months and years, law enforcement would explore the possibility of many different suspects in this case, one of them being Suzie's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Rekla, who had that reputation of being a bad boy, like I had kind of mentioned earlier. Months before the women's disappearance, Rekla actually broke into a nearby mausoleum and stole $30 worth of gold fillings from a skull. He was given a polygraph test in 1992 regarding the women's disappearance and passed. Next, there was Stephen Garrison, a member of a local motorcycle gang in Springfield at the time the women disappeared. In 1993, he reached out to law enforcement offering more information if investigators would help him get out of jail, where he was being held on an unrelated weapons charge. Per Garrison, he was at a drug party when he overheard someone confessing to the murder of the 3 women. He stated their remains were taken to a nearby hog farm in Webster County. It was at this time that police actually felt like Garrison might be somewhat reliable because he had information that was not public knowledge about the kidnappings. In response to Garrison coming forward to police, a judge actually lowered his bail and law enforcement put him up in a nearby hotel. Garrison promptly fled that hotel and actually broke into a woman's apartment a few days later in Springfield and attacked her. That woman actually survived the attack and would later testify against him, and he is now serving 40 years in prison. Gerald Carnahan was the next man to be named as a suspect. Carnahan first got attention in 1985 after he was suspected of beating a woman to death and dumping her body in Lake Springfield. Unfortunately, a judge later dismissed the case. This wasn't the last time Carnahan would be suspected of committing a violent act against women. In 1987, another woman vanished in a similar way to the woman that he had been suspected of killing in 1985. Her name was Debbie Sue Lewis, and her remains were found in Newton County. Like the previous case in 1985, Carnahan was never convicted. Next, in 1993, so very soon after the 3 women went missing, Carnahan was arrested for the attempted kidnapping of a woman from a sidewalk near Sunshine Street in Springfield, Missouri. A break in the previous cases would come in 2007 when his DNA was matched to the first homicide victim in 1985 when he was suspected of murdering Jackie Johns. He was finally convicted by a jury of first-degree murder and forcible rape, for which he is currently serving a life sentence. The final suspect, and probably the most notable and most talked about through this entire investigation, was Robert Craig Cox. Robert was a one-time Army Ranger and actually a former death row inmate. In 1988, he was convicted of slaying an employee of Walt Disney World. However, in 1990, the Supreme Court reversed his conviction, citing a lack of evidence, and he was released. In 1995, Cox was arrested for holding a gun to a child during a robbery in Texas, for which he is now serving a life sentence. Police would interview Robert a few different times over the years, but in 1997, he did an interview with a local news station, and he was quoted as saying that he knew the women were dead, but he would not provide any further details. It was also discovered that Robert Cox actually had a connection to one of the victims, Stacy. He worked at the same car lot as her father previously, and there was also some discrepancies about his alibi for the morning of the 7th. He originally told police that he was with his girlfriend on the morning of the 7th and that they had gone to church. However, his girlfriend later recanted that alibi and told police that she actually had no idea where he was that morning. Police are still somewhat skeptical about Cox's involvement in the women's disappearances. However, he has told law enforcement he refuses to give any further details or information until his mother passes away. Very strange. Law enforcement even played around with the idea that Bart Streeter, which is the son of Sherrill Levitt, brother to Suzie, he could have been involved in the disappearance of the 3 women. He was actually recently estranged from his mother and his sister. However, he did have an alibi for the time of their disappearance and passed a polygraph test. What do you think the most likely theory is for what happened to Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy? Do you think the person responsible is someone they knew or a complete stranger? And was it one person or multiple? Comment below. More than 30 years later, no one has ever been charged with the 3 women's abduction and suspected murders. And Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall have never been found. We still have no answers as to what really happened in that little house in Springfield, Missouri in the early hours of June 7th, 1992. It's hard to believe that it's possible for three women to disappear and leave relatively no trace behind, leaving their loved ones to wonder indefinitely about what really happened to them. I really hope that as time begins to weigh heavy on whoever is responsible, they feel some obligation to bring closure to those families. If you have information about the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, or Stacy McCall, please contact the Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like this video and you'd like to see more like it, please like and subscribe or turn on notifications if that is your thing. I will see you solvers in the next video. Bye.